and it also needs an integrated approach, in my opinion. So the approach that we have been pursuing among my colleagues and with many governments in Africa is what's called an integrated rural development approach. And by that we mean that 5 sectors are simultaneously involved in helping the local areas to surmount poverty, disease, and hunger. Those are agriculture, education, health, infrastructure, and business development. So we take a kind of, now you can divide it slightly different ways, but I like to keep it for one hand, and I like to keep it simple so I can remember it. But I found that when you work in an area and you're taking that kind of holistic and integrated approach, you get lots of synergies. Healthier people are better farmers. Better farmers raise food for school meal programs, help get kids in school, and of course infrastructure is vital for supporting irrigation pumps or safe water or lighting for studying at night or for food preservation or for small businesses. So microfinance is a tool. It's absolutely a tool within that overall approach. I work closely with Mohammed Yunus on a number of Millennium Development Goal initiatives. He's a wonderful, inspiring person, of course, and I very much support, and we see how important microfinance is. We believe it's one tool among many, so we try to stay away from kind of magic bullet or silver bullet approach that if there's just one thing to do, I say, no. We need to do things that really reflect the lives of a community, and that means a few things at a minimum to provide the base of that. Water is I think, pertinent in this regard. Of course, water is life is not only recognized in every culture and society, but we know biologically it's true within a space of 2 or 3 days for each of us. So safe drinking water absolutely is vital, but as you are probably aware, about 70% of the water use of humanity is for agriculture. And when water fails for the crops, that's also devastating. It's not like dying of thirst, but it is ultimately dying of disease or acute undernutrition in some horrible famines. And the water issue I have found to be the toughest of all of the development challenges I've seen, because you can bring in new crops, or you can bring in business, or you can get microfinance, but transporting water is hard. And managing water is hard, and storing water can even be expensive. Of course, there are many specific techniques, but if you look at the drylands of the world that don't have easy irrigation available, either they have oil under the ground, so that they have no other way to get by, let's put it that way, or they have diamonds under the ground, so they have some other way to get by, or they're impoverished. And so a lot of the poorest places in the world are places like Niger and Chad and Mali and Ethiopia and northern Kenya, northern Uganda, Somalia, Yemen, Afghanistan, and so forth. And I keep saying to policymakers, look at the map. That's where the conflicts are. Don't misunderstand this thing. You keep calling it Islamic extremism or something else. These are hungry people. And they're hungry because there's not enough water. And their crops are dying, and their livestock are dying, and the climate is becoming even drier. And it's hard to get the politicians to understand this, by the way. So we end up with drone missiles rather than war wells, which is crazy, because a drone missile is going to solve no problem in this world. and a bore well just might. I know I won't have time for everybody, but I was sitting next to the governor of Cebu province, Mali, at the end of January, and he said to me, Mr. Sachs, help me drill some bore wells, because the nomads are on the outside, they're in the drylands, there's a huge drought, they're trying to come to the river, that means crossing the farmlands, there's a lot of conflict here, Mr. Sachs. And so I went back and I tried to get this UN agency, and that wanted to do something, and within 6 weeks, the whole country was in turmoil because there was a coup, a rebellion, violence. This is what happens with hunger, ladies and gentlemen. It's not surprising. And I've seen it in Yemen, and I've seen it every place close up, and our politicians don't get it. And they say, oh, why should we do things for Mali? And then the next thing you know is, oh, now we have to station, troops here and there. Why? Because in Mali, which they never heard of before, now we have Al Qaeda here. You know, they don't think at all, unfortunately. Honestly. So tell them tomorrow. You want to fight conflict? Help people to have enough to eat. It's not so hard. And it's about 100 times cheaper, 1,000 times cheaper than the stupid ways we're doing it. And what gets me, by the way, I can't help but digress. The amount that we spend each year in Afghanistan for nothing is about 7 times their national income. And if you spend 7 times national income and you leave the place worse off, maybe you have the wrong strategy. TB, absolutely controllable, as you know, treatable, nearly 100% treatable with a regimen which isn't perfect because it takes 6 months, called directly observed therapy short course. But it can be done. There has been a global Stop TB plan for years, underfunded, like the underfunding of AIDS and malaria. That's why it's part of the global fund. It's also a lot of comorbidity with AIDS, of course, because that is the main secondary source of death for HIV-infected Africans. And we have it in the United States. And by the way, one of the things we learned in Africa is the crucial role of community outreach for disease control. As I described to you, we call them community health workers. This is what America needs too. Because we need for our poor communities, not just for people who maybe English is a second language, maybe they're too impoverished, maybe they don't know how to reach the facilities, they don't know how to fill a prescription, they don't understand, and there's no outreach. And I went to one hospital and said, we want to do a community health worker program for you. And say, no, it's okay, we get reimbursed for return visits, for return hospitalization. It's fee for service, so that business model won't work for us. This is the craziness of our system. And so we need that kind of community outreach in the United States as well, especially for our poor communities and our migrant immigrant communities. And this would make a huge difference in our public health. Finally, a couple of things. You asked about the World Bank. There were really 2 great candidates for World Bank president. And I had a fun time for a campaign for a month. We had about 20 heads of state around the world supporting me, but I couldn't get to the White House. But but Jim Kim's a wonderful person, and will be a great World Bank president. But keep after him like everything. You just insist that he does his job. The World Bank's not a bank. That's the main thing I want to remind you. It's our preeminent development institution. It's got to take the lead. It's got to set bold goals and then meet them. And it's core responsibility right now is to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. When you're over there tomorrow, don't let them forget that. We don't need another bank. We have too many banks. And if the World Bank just behaves like a bank, close it down. We need development leadership. And Jim Kim is absolutely wonderfully suited for that, but he's got to lead an institution in a new direction, not as a bank, but as a problem solver, and as the champion of the Millennium Development Goals now and the Sustainable Development Goals to come. And then we're going to get what we need from that institution. Finally, let me say a word about food security and about GMOs and so on. It's complicated. The world is not food secure right now at all. And we have a billion people who are chronically hungry. The majority of them are actually living in farms or in rural areas. It's perverse. It's not the majority of urban slum dwellers. The majority are poor, impoverished farmers that do not grow enough food to feed their families or to feed their communities. And typically, in these poor areas of Africa, the yield is between a half a ton and 1 ton per hectare. So a hectare is 2.5 acres, roughly. And they're getting about 1 metric ton of grain in a year. That's what you get if you have no fertilizer, no improved seed varieties. All you're doing is planting last year's seed on soils that are exhausted of their nutrients. You end up with 1 ton or less. If the rains fail, you end up with nothing. If you plant with, say, a hybrid, not GMO, but a hybrid seed, an improved seed variety, and you improve the soil nutrients through a mix of green and chemical fertilizers, which is what you have to do on these soils in Africa, you can get up to 4 or 5 tons per hectare. That's the difference of hunger and poverty and the beginning of the escape from poverty. So helping smallholder farmers to get past the hoe and last season's seed is the first step out of poverty. Now, the problem is getting worse, though, because the climate and the land is getting tougher. The rains are falling. The precipitation in the Horn of Africa is down by something like a quarter over the last quarter century. And many places the soils are saline now. So there's a lot of stress. Even holding what we have right now is not so simple. Simply projecting, oh, no problem, we're going to have productivity increases in the future is not so simple, because climate change, land degradation, soil nutrient depletion, invasive species, we got a mix of huge problems. We're going to have to deploy our best knowledge on this.
Small-scale permaculture.
Everything. We're going to need all sorts of solutions, but I'll tell you just as an example why I'm not closing the door on GMOs, which I know may sound strange to you. But I was at the International Rice Research Institute last month, which is the Rice Research Institute in Los Banos that brought us the Green Revolution in Africa by IR64 and other high-yield rice varieties, which enabled Asia to get out of what had been unending waves of famine. And so these were the conventional breeding. But they showed me some of the things that they're doing. And two of the things, one is that they're developing varieties that are able to stand submergence in floods. So this is called sub-1 gene. And they have taken a gene, they've done it in a kind of mixed, advanced genetic way. It's not exactly a GMO, but they've taken a gene from wild types that are able to survive underwater and put them into IR64. And in Bangladesh now, people who would absolutely have had nothing but crop failures now have their crops submerged for 10 days and then get a full crop at the end. And so this is something remarkable. And what they're doing is they're doing similar things for vitamin A nutrient supplementation, by putting in beta carotene into the rice variety. They're looking at salinity, they're looking at heat stress, and so on. I don't want to close the door to technologies that may prove to be decisive and life-saving. And so I think that we've got to get this argument better, in my opinion. The argument, in my view, has two major aspects to it. One is safety. There has to be a strong regulatory regime, both for human health and for environment, around the use of any of these advanced technologies. The second is property rights. This cannot become the property of private companies. Monsanto once came to me and said, we want to give our drought-resistant variety to Africa. I said it's much harder than you think to give this away, because you have to give away the scientific support, you have to help establish laboratories, you have to help establish environmental responsibility, and you have to make commitments that this is not IP that's going to take away the claims of poor people. And these are standards that I think are absolutely basic. And they're standards, by the way, that worked pretty well when we finally broke through the AIDS conundrum a decade ago, because you had companies that were similarly doing horrible things, saying, well, that's our IP, we're charging $15,000 even though the production is $200. And we said, no, you're not. Not when it comes to poor people, you're not doing that. And so they broke, they changed. Whether they broke, they finally realized they didn't want to go down a PR IP disaster forever. They said, okay, we do differential pricing. And we let the intellectual property, either through licensing or through zero profit standards or through compulsory licensing and so forth, go to poor people. This is all I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, with this GMO issue. There's safety, there's environment, and there's IP. And then there's needs to feed 7 billion people who will soon be 8 billion by 2024, 9 billion by 2044, facing an array of ecological challenges that are unprecedented. And we're going to need technology to address this. I don't want to close the door to technology, but I want to absolutely make sure that we're doing this in a prudent, fair, honest, and transparent way. That's my position.